Hello, and thank you for choosing to watch this video. This is the fifth in a series focused on the models created for the classic Gerry Anderson TV series, Thunderbirds. The visual effects were supervised and directed by Derek Meddings, who built up a large and very talented team charged with creating aircraft, boats, cars, trucks, and other futuristic machines. To recap, the previous videos are Girder Bridge, which looks at the Airfix Girder Bridge railway accessory kit and its extensive use on the show. Caterpillar Tracks looks at the Vickers Vigor tractor and Tiger Joe tank toys. Kit Bashing looks at more of the railway accessory kits that we used, and More Kit Bashing looks at a number of aircraft kits that were customized, ransacked, cannibalized for detailed parts to embellish and create, in some cases, the many models featured in the show. This video looks at some of the off-the-shelf toys that were cannibalized and customized into futuristic hardware. Starting off with London Airport, which is featured in several episodes, and there's numerous views of the airport with the fire flash preparing for takeoff when Thunderbirds 1 and 2 come into land. And these scenes all show a busy futuristic airport. You see lots of sort of service vehicles parked there, just regular cars parked, some buses, and there's always something sort of driving back and forth, going about their business. And this really kind of gives the whole place life. The most notable of these is a two-section or articulated lorry. And I remember as a child, my brother and I, we had one of these toys. It's a Matchbox toy, in scale with the classic little Matchbox cars, but in itself quite long with both trailers, maybe a foot long, maybe 10 inches. And it's the Matchbox Cooper Jarrett toy. It has Cooper Jarrett logo on the side. So the model making team added a flashing light to the top of that cabin. They changed the livery a little bit. They probably, painted the sort of shiny black plastic wheels in matte paint. They probably did a little bit of dirtying down and stuff. So they look good. They don't look like toys. They look good. And as a youngster, although I had one of these things, I didn't really think they were using toys as a miniature as such. I just accepted it as some sort of reality, this make-believe world of puppets and models. And sort of rather than ruining the magic, it made me feel connected to the show, maybe in some ways. But anyway, looking at these scenes in more detail, we can see a lot more vehicles are Matchbox toy cars. And for anyone not familiar with a Matchbox car, they're probably about 3 inches long. Police cars are probably 3 inches long. I think they're about 1/80th scale or something. There's fuel trucks, BP fuel trucks, silver sort of futuristic looking bus, some fire trucks, there's a fire chief car, police cars that are sort of white and blue, ambulances, as I said, and some civilian cars. They have a lot of sort of futuristic or unusual looking things, sort of a snow cat, the bus that I sort of mentioned. So they all sort of look a bit sort of futuristic. There aren't any Morris Minors or London buses parked there. It all sort of looks cohesive, believable world. You don't identify any of them as such. There's sort of just detail or set dressing in these scenes, and with one or two sort of driving across the runway. This really sells it as a real world. If you look at any of the sort of bases in Thunderbirds or the sort of city scenes or whatever, there's nearly always something driving along or cars that are parked. Something that suggests there's people at work here and daily routines are going on. And I think that really, really helps on a sort of credibility, familiarity level, that you just accept this stuff a lot more than, if they weren't there. So in addition to small toys being used for set dressing, some of the more featured aircraft and vehicles started life as a toy. In the episode Pit of Peril with the Sidewinder, there is a accompanying helicopter called Copter Watchdog, which is used to sort of observe the tests. It's rare because this is one of only 2 helicopters I think you ever see in Thunderbirds. People familiar with the show would know that they had heli-jets, which were basically helicopters but had jets, and that sort of helped add to that futuristic setting of the show. Copter Watchdog was an old-fashioned twin-rotor helicopter, and this model was about 15 inches long and was made from a toy helicopter. Something that was very popular at the time was battery-operated tin toy. So it's really quite crude with sort of painted on windows. It had sort of rubber wheels and would basically just drive along the ground and had flashing lights and stuff. The toy it's a Mark's Commando chopper, and it's based on a Chinook helicopter. And there's several toys of this thing around at the time. So it took quite a bit of time to find it. And the thing which kind of honed me in on that's the one that was actually used, is you can kind of see, because it's a tin toy, you can see the sort of the seam where the bits of metal are kind of pressed together. You can see it around the little pod where the back landing gear comes from. So to turn this into Copter Watchdog, it needed some more work. It looks like they removed the nose and replaced it with a scratch-built cockpit that matches the puppet set and has clear windows. It looks like they might have used some parts from the Hawk Husky helicopter kit. It's hard to really tell. The front landing gear seems to vary shot for shot, possibly shots that were added to the 25-minute segment. One version, at least, looks like it could be using rear landing gear from a Piasecki H-21 helicopter. Aurora did a 1/48 scale kit, but honestly, they could be from World War I biplane, anything. I think there's parts from an Aurora 48 scale Chinook helicopter. Looks like that was the source of this sort of bit that sticks out of the rear of the fuselage. Maybe the intakes on that sort of engine-looking thing look like they are from that Aurora Chinook, and maybe the sort of engine part is the engine from the Lindbergh NATO jet, which is a 48-scale starfighter. And there's also some of the trusty bits from the girder bridge, the original Greebly, among others. The silver cylinders on each side are number 8 batteries. You don't really see these much these days. These ones look like they were probably ever-ready, because in a couple of shots where you see the front surface, you can see they're blue, like ever-ready batteries. And these were there to power the rotor blades and also maybe provide a little bit of stability as well. It's unique because it's actually a helicopter, which you just didn't see in Thunderbirds. Man from My 5 is an episode that involves espionage, and in the story there's these crooks hiding out in their submarine sort of at the bottom of the sea. The submarine doesn't really do anything, it really just sits there because that's sort of the story. They can't get away until the investigation has sort of blown over. It's a really cool episode, and there's some beautiful nighttime shots of Thunderbird 1 and 2 sort of in the bay, and Thunderbird 2 landing on the water to drop the pod. I mean, it's really very high quality stuff. But anyway, this submarine, it's not the most memorable vehicle in the series. And this is a reworking of a model that was built for an episode of Stingray, The Man from the Navy, and it's sort of like the Navy's kind of like submarine. And this model, it's sort of been reworked a bit, but the original model was built from a large racing car toy. So one of those sort of like 1930s, maybe later. And it's sort of this Russian toy made out of sort of thick vinyl plastic, big, over a foot long, I think. The conning tower was added and stuff, but it's basically that racing car sort of turned round, and it has these sort of two, what look like sort of shrouded propellers, and they look to be made from the main cylindrical fan of the SRM-1 hovercraft kit, and I think the pylons holding them up are from the Husky. Some more little kit parts and stuff added, but from this very unlikely origin, the imagination of Derek Meddings, Mike Trim, and the model makers to see this thing and say, hey, you know what, that's going to make a really believable looking futuristic submarine is impressive stuff. Elsewhere in that episode, the crooks get to and from their submarine by going in this little sort of cabin cruiser or Carl's yacht. The basis of this, like the hull and then most of the deck area, is from the Triang Scalex Derwent cabin cruiser toy. A bit over a foot long, about 14 inches, 15 inches long. I think it's battery powered, so probably foaming wake that you see was probably coming from that. And the superstructure looks like that was all custom made and custom designed for the show. But basically the hull and most of the deck area is from that toy, which again it's a pretty limited, simple looking toy. Elsewhere in the show, there is a patrol boat that sort of patrols the area looking for these crooks. And this is made from a Victory Industries Vosper turbine yacht. And this was, I think it was like a promotional toy, so not something you necessarily buy in the shop. And this looks pretty much as is. I think they sort of added the mast and stuff to it and then painted it up. Obviously, they added the hydrofoils, give it that sort of more futuristic or Thunderbirds-y look to it. This is the same as the rescue launch you see in Operation Crash Dive. Just another nice looking model. Watching the show, you kind of see that pretty much everyone drives around in an American convertible. And I've been trying to identify a lot of these. There's literally dozens of kits of Fords and Pontiacs and Plymouths and Chevrolets. And they all looked very similar to each other. Lots of kits of those cars. It's a huge landscape of trying to identify these things. And there's sort of two factors that really come into identifying these. One, the good is, you're only looking for vehicles that existed before 1965, because that's when the show was made. I think they started shooting at the end of 1964 and then were shooting all the way through 65. So any cars after that point definitely couldn't have been the source. The other variable is you have to find the particular kit of that. And based on the parts breakdown, it looks like quite a lot of the cars, it may be a Ford Thunderbird, but the bumper on the front is from a Chrysler Imperial or something. There's a lot of, or it just doesn't have a bumper. It's really difficult to tell. That said, I think there are some that can be identified. In 30 Minutes After Noon, Tom Prescott drives a red convertible, and this looks to me like a 1963 Oldsmobile Imperial, I think. And there was a toy of this by Johan, that's 24th scale. There were kits of this as well, but I think given what it has to do in the story, they wanted something robust, and probably a toy would have been more robust than a plastic kit. Incidentally, this car model is the same model that Scott drives in City of Fire. And that does appear to be a 24th scale model, because you see it in comparison to the model. It's about a foot long. There is a scene in the episode The Imposters where we see this guy taking his beautiful wagon for a spin along these dusty roads. And this is an off-the-shelf toy, a Daisy Coupe from Topper Toys. And this was a big 16-inch long, I think a doll would sit in. So it's pretty big. Looks like they put their own suspension on it, covered it in dust like they always did. And interestingly, the car is outrun by Jeremiah Tuttle, who's another one of International Rescue's agents, in this sort of souped-up Model T Ford. And I think that is a Lindbergh model kit, because Lindbergh did a 1/12 scale Model T Ford, and I think that's probably what they used. The size would be about right in comparison. They added the sort of flat open back section to that. There's several scenes where the World Army are mobilized to go searching for international rescue. It's a great episode. And a lot of these vehicles are sort of quite normal looking. In fact, the tanks that you see are the Tiger Joe tank toy, dirtied down and whatever. And there's several trucks, and some of these look like sort of troop carrying. They've got a canvas top. A couple of them have like a radar scanner on them, some various different configurations. Given that the thing is at least two on screen at a time, it seemed like this probably could be something that was adapted from a model kit or a toy. So I started looking for what sort of this toy could have been. A little bit of a story here, so hang in there. So made around the same time that Thunderbirds was in production was a show called Camberwick Green. This was a stop-motion 15-minute program shown as part of BBC's lunchtime Watch with Mother slot. This was made by Gordon Murray and was very successful, charming in the best way possible, with stories about everyday people, the local baker, the postman, the doctor, etc., all with the incomparable Brian Cant providing the narration. There were two follow-up shows, Trumpton, which featured the iconic Fire Brigade, and Chigley. These were all set in the county of Trumptonshire, so they were kind of interconnected, quintessentially British, quirky, and very appealing. So, what does all this have to do with Thunderbirds and the World Army truck? Well, in a couple of episodes, a large lorry is seen. Unlike most of the other vehicles which were made specifically for the show, this was clearly an off-the-shelf toy. I remember even as a small kid being conscious of the kind of shiny, plasticky wheels and the sort of sparsely detailed bright orange bodywork. It was different. It just looked different from everything else. The Gordon Murray puppets stand at just over 8 inches tall, so this truck is about 2 feet long, a massive toy, and it would be a reasonable size for a Thunderbirds miniature. So after yet more head stretching and Googling, I identified this toy. Well, almost. It's made by a company called Rosedale Products, or Tudor Rose. The 30-ton tipper truck, which is clearly the same toy. The cabin and the chassis and everything are all the same, but it has the sort of tipper dump truck thing on the back instead of the sort of flatbed canvas covering that you see in Trumpton. I can't find any pictures of that particular version, but you can see it's the same basic thing. For the vehicles seen in Thunderbirds, the front engine area was removed and the cabin was moved forward. Glass was added to the windows and the rest of the bodywork looks to have been sort of scratch built. There's the addition of kit parts and details all over it. Nice paint job, dirted down. The sort of standard gizmo they had in all the land vehicles. It would kind of blow dust around underneath it as it drove past. These shots are just top drawer miniature shots from this very unlikely source. And that's why I mentioned the Camboy Green things. It's like, this is what this thing looked like if you just photographed it. And seeing what they did with it in Thunderbirds is really, it's really impressive. I don't want to diminish any of what the accomplishments were in the making of the show. It's not a kind of, that's a toy truck. It's kind of like, wow. They were very creative and very clever and said, hey, look, we can get something that looks really good by getting a jump start from this existing toy. In a lot of the episodes, there's attempts by sort of conventional emergency services to deal with the problem before international rescue attempts to save the people. So there's some fire engines that you see in City of Fire a lot because they're trying to deal with the gigantic Thompson Tower fire. Also, you see some of those same ones in 30 Minutes After Noon. And these are sort of pretty interesting. And I found a lot of information on these from the defunct Eagle Transporter Forum website, which was just a fantastic website of enthusiasts who would sort of analyze kit parts and make their own studio scale models. And it was so great. That pointed me for the sort of two-part front and trailer section fire engines. The front part was a toy amphicar. So this was a toy of a thing that was around in the 60s. It was basically a car that you could drive into the water and drive along. Not a terribly accurate model of that car. I think they had some details to it. The rear section seems to be scratch built. I'm not sure about the wheels, or they may be some of the radio control aircraft wheels that were used on so many of the vehicle models. The fireman's ladder comes from a fire engine toy, something from Pippin Toys, who I'm not familiar with what else they did. I think they did a double-decker bus. But anyway, the Pippin Toys fire engine had this ladder, and I think the actual connection and elevation part, the whole sort of fireman's ladder came from that toy and was used also on the sort of yellow fire department truck that you see in City of Fire, which was customized from the Marshall Space Probe transporter from Day of Disaster. And you see it again in the hangar scene in Cry Wolf. So you can tell that was the lineage of the model. They did Day of Disaster. They probably went back for additional shots for City of Fire and converted that model into the fire engine. And then when they did Cry Wolf, it was in that configuration and they used it again. There's another fire engine seen only briefly, and it's one of the four types sort of tackling the fire. There's two of the two-part ones, one with like three hose sort of machines on the back, one with a long ladder and the hose, the yellow one, and this one. And this one is made from the Transcontinental Express toy. That toy appeared in Stingray. In the episode The Loch Ness Monster, they have to take Stingray over land to get to the loch, and you see it on this sort of transporter driving through the Scottish hills. And it's basically one of these vehicles that has the second level canopy removed, and then there's some sort of apparatus and stuff to hold Stingray in place. And it looks pretty good. It's interesting, though, for Thunderbirds, it's probably a less prominent role. You see it for less time, but it's got a lot more detail to it. And it's dirtied down and all the rest of it. Again, it has the top sort of bubble section removed. The firefighting equipment is parts of the girder bridge, and it looks like there's a Hustler fuel tank on the side. I haven't been able to work out what the cabin on top is. I thought it was from the amphicar, but it's not. Yeah, don't know what that is. Something that was not used when they were making Thunderbirds, but was used in pretty much every show after that, and is sort of a big ingredient in the DNA of a lot of the Anderson vehicles, is the Topper Toys Johnny Express toy truck. This was another massive toy, I think like 2.5 feet long, the cabin and the trailer. Huge toy, had one of the sort of wired remote controls, you could drive it along, and it's put to use most memorably in Joe 90, in the episode where they're having to drive these army trucks full of explosive fuel across mountains and stuff. Those trucks had 3 axles, 6 wheels, 2 tires on each wheel. So like 12 wheels. This toy had 6. So they needed 2 of these Johnny Express toy trucks to get the wheels they needed for 1 explosive truck. And there's 3 explosive trucks. They might have taken a mold off a couple of the wheels and just made molds of them. But I don't think that was the sort of stuff they were doing. So that takes time. That's fiddly. You've got to make the molds. You've got to resin or whatever. And so we've got to cure. And that just doesn't feel like something they were doing a lot of on the shows. In any sort of filmmaking, time is money. So if there's something which is an immediate solution, even if it's expensive, and these toys probably were expensive, just having something like, it's there, you can use it, it's done, problem solved, that's probably what they would have done. In Captain Scarlet, there's a couple of episodes which feature this transporter lorry that's carrying around this nuclear device. And that model looks like it's the Johnny Express trailer chassis, and the whole cabin section adjusted a bit. It's just a bit more futuristic. In Fire at Rig 15, the sort of Red Air character, Jason Smith, has a truck, and that looks like it was probably customized from that nuclear lorry. When you think of an Anderson vehicle, you think of big chunky wheels or Caterpillar tracks, and certainly the big chunky wheels, a lot of them come from this toy. The others are the radio control plane wheels that you see on the elevator cars as well. The Mighty Atom is one of the extended 25-minute episodes. There's a whole thing about Thunderbird starting as a 25-minute TV show, and it was midway in production, adapted to be 50 minutes, which caused no end of headaches. And there's a lot of, spot the difference, try and find the additional scenes. Anyway, in the Mighty Atom, there's an extensive scene at the beginning where you see this nuclear power station in Australia. It's sabotaged by the hood and it explodes in spectacular fashion. And there's a lot of very creative use of existing models. But the thing which is neat and why it's in this video is the main reactor that you see quite prominently. It's just really impressive. You have these shots where you're sort of looking up at it, and it's this huge spherical reactor sitting on top of this building. And the building it's sitting on is the Fireflash hangar that you see from Operation Crash Dive. And then there's quite a lot of detail added. There's bits of the SRM-1 hovercraft. There's virtually the whole gantry and more stuff from Everything Is Go. And it just looks really great. It looks really big. It looks really practical. And through the course of the episode, bits of it start to catch fire. And at one point, it's really just scorched and blackened by the flames. And the paint is peeling off. And you can see the bare metal. I mean, it's just really great stuff. And during my research, trying to find some other parts, I came across this information that that reactor is actually one of those old spherical vacuum cleaners, a Hoover Constellation vacuum cleaner. Once that's mentioned, you're like, oh, of course, we had one of those. And then when the paint gets burned off, it's a metal thing under there to survive the rigors of filming. So this is genius, because I think there's nothing about this whole setup that looks compromised. It's an old aircraft hangar, it's some bits of plastic kits and a Hoover all put together, but it looks fantastic. I mean, this is one of my favorite sort of models or scenes in the series. It just looks so good and so big and really, really impressive. That pretty much wraps it up. If you haven't seen the other videos in this series, the kit bashing, girder bridge, Caterpillar tracks, give them a look or rewatch them in light of some of what's discussed here, because there's a lot of overlap. This is trying to sort of give some history and context, but it's hard to sort of isolate it. The designers and the model makers were really skillful and talented, and I think intuitive about taking existing bits and pieces of whatever they could get their hands on, and more importantly, whatever they could imagine being used in a different way in the creation of a new model or detailing a new model. High level of detail, elaborate markings, lots of stencils, dirtying down, drawn on panel lines, great designs in the first place, really well shot. It all sort of comes together, and everything in this video, we're not talking about Thunderbird 1, Thunderbird 2, Thunderbird 3, the big hero machines, or even the featured machines like the Sidewinder or the Fireflash. These are one-offs, extras, set dressing type things. So they were made a lot cheaper, but they still look great. I mean, they don't look like, oh, that's a toy thing or that's something stuck on top of it. They just look really, really cool and believable. They just look right. This was a TV show made 60 years ago. This year is the 60th anniversary of when Thunderbirds debuted. And it still looks fantastic. That wraps it up. Thanks very much for watching. If you liked the video, please hit the like button. If you want to see more, please subscribe. Please feel free to add comments. Take a look at the website. Check out other videos on the channel. And feel free to contact me via the website. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you soon. Thanks. Bye-bye.